everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane. I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. We may have some new users or listeners out there, so if you are new, welcome. I did take last week off. There were a lot of things going on, but I've been prepping for this week, and I'm very, very excited for this week's episode. Hopefully, you guys will feel the same way. Lots of fun things in store for the next month or so. For those of you who haven't done so already, go ahead, give this a like, subscribe to it, leave a comment, a review, whatever you can. The more you guys do that and interact, the better it is for the algorithm and helps us grow this. As you know, if you've been listening for a while or been listening to my other podcast, This Day in Philly Sports History, and if you haven't, you should definitely go check that out. We've had a partnership going on with phillygoat.com. We've been talking a lot about them during Father's Day, but it is Philly season. We're in the dog days of summer. Today, actually, as I'm recording this, it is the first day of summer, which means it's basically Phillies. We have the NBA and NHL draft, but for the next 6 weeks or so, or month, it's 6 weeks before the first preseason football game. It is all Phillies all the time. And even those first couple of preseason games are not that good anyway. So, I want to show your support for the Phillies, who have been red hot, even though they lost a heartbreaker last night to the Braves. Go to phillygoat.com. They have a ton of Phillies gear and apparel. I'm wearing my Father's Day present, the Philly Fanatic with the Major League Baseball logo. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see, I mean, it's a great shirt. Make sure it has the Philly Goat patch, so you're not getting any counterfeit or knockoff Philly Goat merchandise. Use the promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off of your order. You can see that I'm wearing this in a navy blue. They have the one that is the Philly Fanatic green that looks awesome. And that's the beauty of Philly Goat. They have pretty much you can get any color t-shirt you want. So go to phillygoat.com. Use the promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off your order. Phillies aren't your thing. They have Eagles, they have Flyers, they have Sixers, they have Rocky. I talked and showed this morning if you're a Mike Tyson Punch-Out fan, Mr. Sandman was from Philly, so they have Mr. Sandman's boxing gym shirt, which I love. They have Philly neighborhood stuff. You name it, pretty much you can find it on phillygoat.com. So go check them out. Use that promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off of your order. That's all one word. And make sure you have the authentic Philly Goat on your sleeve. So as I mentioned, we're in the dog days of summer. And this came about at a perfect time, I would say. I was messing around on Twitter the one day, and I saw that Barstool Philly had a question on their Twitter asking about what is Philly's favorite team that never won a title. And that really got me thinking, because obviously, as any Philadelphia fan knows, that could be any one of many of our teams. Because we've always come so close. Like, we have a ton of either losses. I mean, last year, for instance, we had the Phillies who lost. We had the Union who lost, and the Eagles who lost in the Super Bowl. 3 teams, 3 straight major sports championships we lost. And then you had the disappointment of the Sixers. So it just got me thinking, like, there's just so many and too many to name. And I'm like, how can I incorporate this into both podcasts in a way to get everybody involved and just not forget any of those teams? And then I realized, all right, it's the dog days of summer. There's not much going on. What if we did something where we chose our favorite team for each of the 4 major sports? And I'm like, well, how do we do that? And it got me thinking about March Madness. Well, everybody knows you start off with a large group and work your way down. And more on that in a minute. But even before I got there, I'm like, okay, if I had to choose my favorite teams without even putting any thought or parameters on it, I kind of did the tournament bracket in my head. I'm like, okay. So I started with the Flyers, and I'm like, well, I don't remember too many of the teams from like early 90s back. So I was kind of going through all of the disappointment and all of the Flyers near misses that I've seen in my life, and I kind of went through and I was like, oh, it could have been this one, it could have been that one. But the one season to me that stuck out the most was that 99 2000 season. And I think because they were the number one seed, they had played a good chunk of that season without Eric Lindros. I actually watched a lot of that season for the Flyers. Anyway, they had that memorable five overtime game against the Penguins. Basically, everybody in Philly was captivated. It was one of those teams like some of the other, like the Sixers and some of the Phillies teams and Eagles teams, where everybody was rooting for the Flyers. They had the 3-1 lead, and then it all kind of came crashing down. The Lindros hit, they blew the 3-1 lead and everything. But I think of all of the Flyers misses that I have been a part of, that was the one that stood out to me. For the Sixers, I think it's fairly obvious which one, and I think everyone would probably choose the 2000-2001 team was everyone's favorite. I mean, you want to talk about taking over the city. I mean, we've seen Phillies World Series, we've seen the Eagles win the Super Bowl. I don't think either of the '08 Phillies or 2017 Eagles, neither one of them, and I would even be so willing to say put both of them combined, and that's how into that Phillies or that Sixers team the entire city was. And I know in '08, everybody, that's where they started the Red October. And obviously, as an Eagles fan, like I know that Eagles Super Bowl meant so much and meant the world. But if you remember back and you were alive for that and really a part of that, I'm not so sure there's any team except maybe the next one we're going to say that really captivated the city like that. With AI, they just did the documentary on it, which I talked about on This Day in Philly Sports History, and it just, man, I just forgot how much we lived and died with that team. For the Phillies, I mentioned the '08, but the '08 team won, and then after that, they were sort of the favorites, so it was a little bit different. But I think for me, it was the '93 team, and that team I watched every single game or at least listened to because we didn't have Prism at the time. But like I actually listened to the games that were on Prism, including the doubleheader that went till 4:40. We went on vacation, was able to watch a couple games there when we went to Cooperstown. And that was another team that really, really captivated the city. And just because of their personality and how much, even after the fact, I mean, you have Kruk that does he's one of the Phillies TV guys. You had Darren Doughton, who was beloved even after he was traded away. You have guys like Mickey Morandini and Kevin Green, who still work for, or not Kevin Green, Tyler Green, who work for the Phillies and do just ambassador work. All those guys still come back, like Milt Thompson, like those guys keep coming back um, to the Phillies, and I think that's because they meant so much and they connected so much with that city. Even though he's kind of gone off the deep end, even Lenny Dykstra, I mean, he still has great things to say about Phillies and the everything. And by the way, it was Tommy Green. I don't know why. Kevin Green was an NFL player. Tyler Green was a prospect pitcher that never. Tommy Green is the one that still works for the Phillies with Mickey Morandini. I'll get there. It's been a long time, but that team was just a lot of fun. Uh, for the Eagles, I think you could have picked any one of those teams in the late '80s. You could have picked any one of those teams in the Andy Reid era. But I think the one for me that stands out was the 2004 team. And I think because you had so much build up to get there, like the near misses, like you had the loss in '01, you had the loss in '02, the '03, and then finally to get over the hump. I still think that to me, they kind of lost it when they weren't able to like once they were able to get over the hump and get to the Super Bowl, I think that's what ultimately did that team in. But that's my favorite team to never win. Obviously, the '08 Phillies, the 2017 Eagles will always have a special place in my heart. The Sixers and Flyers, unfortunately, I've not seen them in my lifetime. Well, the Sixers won, but I was like 3 or 4 when the Sixers won. So I don't have that frame of reference. I know this is going to be what I'm getting into is going to be strictly for the 4 major teams, but I have to give them a shout out for the 99 2000 Temple Owls. I've talked about that a lot, that frustrating trip to Buffalo where we were already making plans for the following weekend to go to Syracuse, and it just wasn't meant to be. But that was one of my all-time favorite teams. So, with all that being said, I've kind of alluded to this, but I'm like, all right, it's a dog days of summer, trying to get more interaction on the podcast. What can I do? And like, if you've been following this day in Philly sports history, I've been doing a lot of things each month, like starting with Black History Month. I highlighted a this Philly Philly this day in Philly sports history, Black History Spotlight. I did Women's History Month. We're doing Rivalry Month right now. We did the Sixers playoff seasons in May. Just something to keep it interesting and expand the podcast a little bit and get more of a reach. So I'm like, how can I do this? I mean, it would there. I don't know what we were going to do for July and August because of the dog days. And then it hit me. I saw that tweet from Barstool Philly, and I'm like, why don't we have a game with all of these teams? And I know it might have been more suited for March, but I figured it worked out perfect. If we take 32 teams, that's every day in July, we get a winner. And picking the teams, that's sort of where I struggled with is what the criteria should be. And I wanted to keep it even for all the sports. I didn't want to overload it with Flyers or overload it with Eagles or this, that. So I decided 32 was a perfect number. Why don't we do 8 teams for each, or 8 seasons for each team? And I was trying to figure out the best way to do it. And to me, I just kept coming back to this theme of lovable losers. And yeah, we make fun of it all the time. And I know last year during the Phillies run, I kept talking about old Philly versus new Philly. But the fact of the matter is you can't get away from our history. And we've had a ton of losing seasons, but that doesn't mean we didn't like those teams and love those teams. I mean, for the love of God, even the Sixers this year, despite the fact of how they ended and just all of the chaos that happened after that last game against the Celtics, it was a hell of a season. It was a fun team to watch for most of it. Frustrating at times, but it was still fun to watch the Sixers this year. So that's why I kept coming back to this lovable losers. But I didn't want it to be like the 1991 Phillies who were just terrible. Like I wanted to focus on the teams that were good. And I went back to that question, the favorite team to never win a championship. So at first I looked at all of our runner-up championships. So I'm like, okay, those teams will get the top seeds. So for instance, the last year's Eagles and last year's Phillies, they're going to be they're going to get one of the higher seeds. So I seeded them first. Obviously, we didn't have 8 in any of the 4 major sports that have lost. Because fortunately, we have won a couple championships, so we're able to kind of get that. And then from there, I'd said, all right, let's fill it out with playoff teams. The rest of the brackets are teams that made the playoffs, whether it would be the NFC Championship or even like last year's Sixers team who did make the playoffs. I wanted to make sure it was teams that either had a shot or were at least alive in the playoffs. Minus one notable exception, which when I unveil the brackets, you will see. So then I had to seed them. So obviously you had multiple teams that got to the finals and did not win. So I had to kind of base them on the talent level of the team, the level of disappointment when they lost, and then some intangibles like how they captivated the. Whoops, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Alexa reminders. But so some intangibles, like how did they captivate the regions? Like I mentioned the 2001 or 2001 Sixers. That was one team that really just took over the city. Were they lovable? I think everybody will say the 93 Phillies were a very lovable team. Everybody loved them. Were they over or underachievers? I think you could say last year's Phillies team was probably an overachieving team. Maybe the 2004 Eagles or even last year's Sixers were underachievers. And ultimately, I kind of base it off of my feelings and everything on that, since I was coming up with the seeding. Now, before I unveil the brackets, although I decided to do the seeding, I was the selection committee, if you will. Here's how here's how this game or here's how this tournament is going to run. We're going to start it on July 1st. We're going to focus on one matchup per day, and then we're going to rotate through the brackets. So if we do Eagles on the first, we'll do Flyers on the second, Sixers on the third, Phillies on the fourth, go back to the Eagles. So that way we're spreading it out a little bit and making it more entertaining for everyone. You guys are going to do the voting. Whether it's through comments on the podcast, I figured out how to set up questions on, if you listen on Spotify, I'll set up polls on my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, my social media, TikTok. You can text message, you can call me. If you have my phone number, send me smoke signals. I just ask that you don't mail me a letter, because once that day's matchup is done, we're moving on to the next one. Send me an email if you want. And for the criteria, use whatever you want to use. That's sort of what I did. I did a combination of whatever. Who's a better team? Like who would have won if, say, the 1990 Phillies and the 91 Phillies played each other? Who would win? That could be your criteria. Who's your favorite team? Maybe you just have an affinity for the 1983 Phillies, so you vote for them every time they have a matchup. That's fine. Maybe you're like, you know what? Fuck these guys. Whoever disappointed you or pissed you off the most, vote for them. Maybe it's who should have won the title, like this year's Sixers, maybe. Although I don't think they would have beat Jokic. Whatever criteria you want, I'm going to give you some background information on the teams, and then you're going to take it and run with it. All of this leading up to July 31st. We're going to culminate it with Philly sports most lovable losers for 2023. So like I said, just something that's a little bit of fun to help break up some of the monotony and the dog days of summer. If you are watching this is where the fact that it's on Zoom, I'm going to share my screen and get that in. If you're not watching and you're listening, that's fine. I'm going to kind of go through, but I am going to post the brackets somehow through the podcast and on my social media as well. I'll give you where to follow all that at the end of the podcast. But without further ado, let me share my screen and we will get going with the unveiling of the first ever Philly Lovable Loser bracket. All right. So, going to start off with the Eagles regional. And as you can see, the Super Bowl losers got the top seeds. I went with the 04 Eagles as the 1 seed. Last year's Eagles team as the 2. The 80 Eagles as the 3. The 1947 Eagles, who lost the NFL championship that year before winning 2, I got them in at number 4. And then I was like, okay, we went to a ton of NFC championship games with Andy Reid. Those were the next 3 teams. I went 2002, 2008, and 2003 in that order. And I did not include 2001 because I felt that they were sort of they weren't expected to be there. It was kind of like more of a magical run. So it was less disappointment than just sheer joy that we knew the team was taking the next step and getting better as we right before our eyes. The 8th seed, I actually had I went with the 1988 Eagles, and this was 100% a personal thing for me. I figured they beat out the 1991 team, which was one because they didn't make the playoffs, even though they probably would have won the Super Bowl that year. And of all the Buddy Ryan's team, I feel like that 1988 team was the best one. So that is why I put them in as the 8th seed. And they, again, I put them in over the 2001 Eagles, who went to the NFC Championship game, mainly because that game did not bother me as much as some of the other ones. So again, I mean, you could argue every year during the NCAA tournament, I wanted to make, at first I was going to make this a 64. That's how bad the Philly sports landscape is. I was going to make this a 64 team bracket, but then I was just like, man, that's 2 months of this, and I wanted to keep it short, sweet, and keep in line with what I've been doing on this day in Philly sports history. So that's why I went 32. If you want, leave me a comment. I'm gonna, if you listen on Spotify, I'm gonna put in the question for this podcast is gonna be, who's the biggest snub? Who did I leave out that should have been in this tournament for the lovable losers? And if you don't listen on Spotify, leave me a comment wherever you're listening. Again, shoot me a text message, whatever you have to do, because that's what I'm anxious to see. Who did I miss? All right, so now it's on to the Flyers regional. Oh, before I go on to that, this is the way I'm announcing these in order. So at the end, once we get to our final four, the Eagles regional will play, the winner of the Eagles regional will play the Flyers winner, winner of the Flyers regional, and then the winner of the Sixers regional will play the winner of the Phillies regional. So that's why there's the method to that madness. All right, so let's unveil the Flyers regional. All right, so we have the Stanley Cup teams: 76-77, 79-80, 96-97, 84-85, 86-87, and 2009-2010. They are there was 8 or 6 of them, so it basically was easy to fill out the bracket. I ranked them based on sort of, I did some research on this because the earlier Flyers days are not necessarily my strong suit, and any one of these teams could have been a number 1 seed. That's how deep this bracket is in disappointment. I added the 99-2000 team, which I mentioned earlier, just because, yes, they were one of my favorite teams, but they were the number 1 seed too. Like, they were a pretty damn good team that had high expectations. And then I went with the 85-86 Flyers team. That was the year that Pelle Lindbergh died. And again, there were so many teams. I'm sure Flyers fans are going to have, I could probably ask 10 Flyers fans and they would give me 10 other seasons that could have been included on this bracket that haven't. But again, let me know. I had to narrow it down to 8, and I wanted to make sure that the runners up all, they were kind of like the conference tournament winners, where if you made it to the finals and lost, you were automatically in the bracket. Maybe the next tournament we can change up the ruling a little bit, but again, now I know, as I'm going through this, like, I'm starting to sweat a little bit because now I know what the selection committee goes through every March. All right, now I feel like I should be Greg Gumbel too. Now it's on to the Philadelphia or the Phillies regional. All right, Phillies regional, again, World Series losers: 2009, 93, 50, 1915, 1983, and 2022. Again, with the Phillies, it was very easy because there's 6 World Series losers that were able to do it. The one thing I think, we're going to have this, this is probably my favorite bracket. I think there's going to be some of you who are very disappointed with the 1993 Phillies getting a 2 seed. And this was a tough one. We went back and forth in the war room and the selection committee meetings, but we did come out with the 2009 Phillies, more so, and I can explain more once we get into that matchup. They got a tough draw, though. It's going to be hard to beat that 1964 team, who's the only non-playoff team to make this. And because we've taught, everybody knows about the fold with Chico Ruiz stealing home, and because they were the last team out, or the first team in, I should say, the last 4 in, it's going to be a tough matchup for that 09 Phillies team. So you might be mad at me about the 93 team getting the 2 seed, but they have a better draw, I think, than than everything. And we'll get more into that once we get into the matchups. And then I went with the 2011 team as the 7th seed, basically because they had the best record they in the league that year. They have the franchise record for wins in a season, and it sort of was like the end of that era. We just knew once we saw Ryan Howard crumbled up in a heap, we kind of just knew it was all over at that point. All right, and last but certainly not least, let's unveil the Sixers regional. All right, again, the NBA final teams that lost, the 79-80, 76-77, 2000, 2001, and the 81-82 teams are the top 4 seeds. I know there's going to be some people very upset that the 2000, 2001 Allen Iverson Sixers got a 3 seed, but I feel like that's where they belong in the hierarchy of this. Because remember, this is Lovable Losers. There's a lot of different intangibles that went into there, not just the fact that we love the team. And again, once we get into these matchups, you'll see why. But I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of shit for that, and that's fine. I understand that. It comes with the territory. Next 2 teams in were the 2018, 2019, and 2020, 2021 teams. And I could have basically every year that Joel Embiid's teams made the playoffs, I could have made them into the tournament. So I wanted to limit it to 2 Joel Embiid teams, and that was hard, to be completely honest. I could have went with this year's team. I could have went with that bubble team. Like, there was just so many different ways I could have gone, but I wanted to limit it to 2 because unfortunately for the Sixers, this is probably the deepest regional of the 4 in this tournament. And I mean, because there's just so many teams that were disappointing. I mean, you could have gone any team from 1976 to probably 1986 could have made this tournament. You could have made a couple of those Barkley teams could have made the tournament. Name your pick on Allen Iverson teams that could have made it. Joel Embiid teams could. So this is hands down. This is the deepest and toughest bracket in the entire tournament. And that's because I had to limit the Embiid teams, and it's kind of like an SEC team who is like the 10th team in the SEC is losing out to possibly like a mid-major, but you had to do what you have to do. We put these parameters in place, so we had to stick with them. Then I went to the 85-86 team. If you listen to Back to the Future, you know what happened at the end of that 86 season. It was the end of an era, and the way it went out, it just was all-time disappointment. And finally, the 1980-81 Eastern Conference Final team that went to the finals the year before, went to the finals the year after, and probably would have had a good shot to beat the Lakers that year had they actually gotten to the finals. All right, so there you have it. Those are our brackets. We will, like I said, make sure you are listening to and watching or listening, however you get your podcast, This Day in Philly Sports History every day, because each day for July, there's going to be a new matchup, and you're going to get your opportunity to vote. Just something, like I said, get some more audience participation, interaction. I'm working on a couple other things as well, but I feel like this is a good way to get everybody involved. I mean, this is something you can do while you're sitting on the beach. Talk to your father-in-law if you're going to your beach house. Talk to your dad. Talk to your brother-in-law, your brother, cousins, or hell, even ask your grandma. I used to talk to my grandma about some of these teams, and she would tell you how she loved them, but they drove her crazy. And that's the spirit of this tournament. So you have to make sure you're listening to This Day in Philly Sports History every day. It's sort of like a cross promotional between the 2 podcasts, trying something crazy here. But next week we're going to be back to our normal, Back to the Future. We're going to take a look at the best free agent signings. I know we did something before on the worst with the Eagles, but we're going to take a look at the best free agent signings in Philadelphia sports history. That could have been something else we did a tournament for, but I thought this was more fun. But I do want to, it's NBA free agency starts next week. So I wanted to make sure we're doing that. Again, you have to make sure you're listening to This Day in Philly Sports History to participate in it. If you can't figure out how to get in touch with me, wherever you're watching this or listening to this, leave a comment right there. Somehow get in touch with me. I'm like Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees. Somehow somebody somehow can get in touch with me. But we're winding up the rivalry month in June, and we're going into the Lovable Losers tournament. And I love it. Super, super excited. Just make sure you're voting, especially if you have strong feelings one way or the other. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast. Tell somebody else. And the beauty of this is have somebody else who wants to vote and wants to have a little bit of fun. Just spread the word. Let's get those numbers up. Help this algorithm out so we can get some more sponsors, like Philly Goat. You guys have been doing a great job supporting them and buying t-shirts. So please continue to buy shirts and merchandise from them. Promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off. They're an amazing company, and the shirts are cool and they're comfortable. If you need to vote, you can find YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Jimbo_Mont. I'm going to have the brackets available on as many of my social media platforms as possible. If you need to comment me, DM me, send me an email, and I can shoot you the brackets if you want to kind of score at home. Instagram, you can find me at Philly Jimbo. I will have the brackets on Instagram. That is a given. But I'm very, very excited. Thank you for listening. This has been Back to the Future. Go have yourselves a week. And until next time, I'll see you when I see it.